it's incorporated into our lives. So when a child's walking through a hallway, when a child's in a classroom, when a child's doing an assignment, like those examples I said before, it's not about everyone walking around on eggshells, but it's about giving that child the voice and having a responsive culture where if a child says, this assignment doesn't work for me, I'm scared about pickup today because the parents raising me are away for vacation and my auntie's picking me up and I never stayed at their house. And that's making me think about my birth mother. We don't start saying things like, it's not a big deal, which is what we do, right? And I've been guilty of it too. Like, it's not a big deal, or, okay, that's your issue, but the other 399 kids in this building have issues too. Like, I think there are ways that we are expedient sometimes as educators, and it gets in the way of our ability to really support kids.
Welcome to the Mindset on Resilience podcast. I am your host, Daniel Truelove, and I am so excited for the guest that we have for you all today. He is amazing nonetheless. And as you know, we're all here about building a more confident, resilient, and mentally strong community. And I promise you, he's going to do just that for us. He is a professor, former principal, author, and I'll say just an all around amazing person. I had the honor and pleasure of meeting him. We were both speaking at a conference in Arizona, and it was from that conference and us continuing our conversations, learning more about the work that he's doing. His book, the author of a book focused on belonging and adopted and looked after students, and he's going to share a lot of that journey with us today. And so I'm excited to bring to you none other than Dr. Max Weinberg. How you doing, sir?
Good. How are you? Thanks for that intro. Pretty good. Yeah. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to have met you. I feel like I'm lucky to be invited on. So thank you.
The good thing is the feelings are mutual. If it was like one or the other, then that's when you start having problems. Right, right. And so I would love to go here because you've done a lot of amazing things as an educator. Obviously starting in the classroom, and then not only are you a professor, but you're also a consultant doing work, helping principals, consulting. You're doing a lot of things that is impacting the education community. But obviously, it didn't all start there. So, can you take us a little bit on your journey for how you got to where you're at right now?
Yeah. So it's funny listening to myself. I still have, I think, a lot of educators who spend time with a lot of kids. We see the genius in kids. We see the genius in adults doing leadership work, and it's like that description sounds like someone else. Like I'm living a life, and I'm older than I think I am sometimes. But I think it's also that I always want to be learning. Um, so I right now I'm a leader. My days are spent being a leadership coach for principals throughout Chicagoland, and I also am just kind of doing some of my own thing on the book and the research that you mentioned on supporting a sense of belonging in schools. And I say that it's taken me a long time to understand how I've gotten here and how a lot of my mission has been in centering um, adult learners' full being and kids just as they show up. And so I think like when I story tell, I jump all over the place, and a lot of that's really how I've made sense of my own life. Um, I was a pretty I grew up in a with a pretty privileged existence. Family didn't have to. My parents worked very, very hard, but didn't really have to struggle against many outright isms in our life. White suburban life outside of Chicago, white kid, fit in if I wanted to. Um, when I didn't want to fit in, it took real effort. Like when I went through my punk phase, or went through different phases, it was like I'm just testing it out, and I knew there weren't going to be big repercussions for it. Um, I did grow up in a suburb where it was very clear to me that to be different, to have to look different, there were big consequences. The youngest, I remember being 3 or 4, hearing and seeing people who looked like me throw the N word out. I remember having people come to our house and say, "Don't ever move here, and if you don't ever leave here, and if you ever do, don't sell to black people." Um, and some of that was the realities of living outside of Chicago, like people who had left Chicago because they feared integration. And some of it was, what we're seeing on steroids now of just people clinging to an existence that they knew, that deep down in their hearts, I believe they knew was fragile and was built on some pretty bad things. And I didn't understand that at the time. What I understood was like, this is bad and people are being mistreated. So even if I felt different in different ways on the inside, all I had was like the push to sort of fit in, conform, be like everyone else. But watching, I mean, there are too many stories that I have, or too many memories where I felt like I can remember that teacher picking on, my best friend who was Chinese American, singled out, being asked like if he eats dog at home. Um, a black student, I still remember his name. Um, I want to say his name because I think about him all the time, and I realize I should have spoken up. In 5th grade, being singled out by our white teacher, who I really loved the teacher, but it wasn't until later that I was like, wow, you really singled him out, where it's just like, um, basically made him kind of like kiss the ring kind of feel. And it stood out to me. And um, all of those things really popped out at me when I realized I wanted to be an educator. And I studied English as an undergrad. I knew I wanted to be a writer. I knew I really wanted to do the type of writing like truth telling. Like, let me get at storytelling. Let me find out what really goes on here. Whether it was like, I didn't have this name for it, but like investigative journalism, or like opinion pieces about righting the wrongs of history. Um, After college, I thought I'd take a stab at teaching. I did Teach for America, and that's a whole other conversation about how Teach for America plays out. Um, but it was when I landed teaching in the South Bronx with all 100% black and brown students that I was like, oh, there's real genius here. Um, they're being really, I'm using this term, and before we had the COVID-19 pandemic, they're being sort of quarantined. The students that I got were kind of being like, I got tracked students who were kind of being pushed to the side. The sense from the principal was like, you'll do something with them, but it won't be enough. These kids are just who they are. And when I met them, I was like, okay, maybe no one is really invested in their skills, but when it comes to their joy, um, their critical thinking skills, I didn't have the language for it, but I was like, they blow me out of the water with all the privileges I have. Like, I might have had the skills to be able to get this college degree or whatever, whatever I got to do, but they were 12 and 13, and they were just like, brilliant and very humbling for me, of like, I don't know what I'm doing, and we only have each other in this room. No one's coming to save any of us. So let's do cool stuff. And that year, I'll never forget that year. I think everyone remembers their first year of teaching, but for me, it was, my parents poured this in me, or I got to do this, that, and the other. Let's do it. So we read House on Mango Street. We wrote letters to Sandra Cisneros. She came to visit us. Um, there was a community based arts organization. We formed a partnership with them. We did it was in the South Bronx. We did some work on the greening of the Bronx River. Our kids got involved in the community, and I was the typical Teach for America story, unfortunately, in that I didn't stay there, but I like to think that I was different because I stayed involved in teaching, and it shaped me for forever. Um, I keep in touch with some of those kids still, and this was almost 25 years ago. Um, so that stayed with me throughout my teaching. Fast forward, when we moved to Chicago, I landed at a job at a very expensive private school in a part of Chicago that's very segregated, predominantly white. Um, and I learned about what this other side of the population gets. It's not the education I received in public schools, but it was sort of the price of, the price tag of a $30,000 a year education at the time. It's way more even now. And you had parents who were paying all this money for their kids to essentially to dig in the dirt, explore, wonder about the stars. Yes, be politically involved, meet with civic leaders and ask them questions. And even the most conservative parents wanted that for their kids. Um, and so that was an education on what, for me as an educator, what uh, real like sort of differentiation can look like. All these words that are thrown about, like um, using sort of the multiple intelligences, but really, like when you're allowed to use anything you want for third graders, and you can be project based, and you can do research workshop, what that can all look like. Um, and I couldn't stay there for a long time because they did not have like a really meaningful, authentic equity initiative. They couldn't have lived it out. They still struggle with it today, I think, despite a lot of lip service. Um, and but those two experiences really have shaped me and framed my understanding of what can happen in schools. I'd say also being a parent, having my own kids, and thinking that real lens of like, if it's not good enough for my own kids, then how can I walk in school and say it's good enough for other kids? Um, and one thing I didn't share in my childhood that was very, very formative, obviously, was I lost my sister when I was 15. She had childhood cancer. And I think it took me a long time to understand how I operate in the world. But when I saw children who were being seen as not worthy by like my principal, all the way going back to the South Bronx, but I've heard it in many different systems I've worked at. When I've heard people talk about children, like individual children and groups of children, like um, this is the best they'll do. Don't challenge them too much. Why are you doing all of that for students? I do fall back on this really formative experience I had with my sister of like, I mean, besides the fact that, she taught me everything I know, is also like, we're not promised tomorrow. So every single day for every child should be the richest day possible. And some days that's not going to be fly me to the moon, but with the tools you have and the time you have, there should be a really rich experience here. And so those are the sorts of experiences I think I carry with me, and they build a strong sense of urgency, but not just results urgency. I also mean like depth in relationship building and in experiences.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And I, as I've like learned more about you, like the experiences that you've had, I see why you do the work that you do, like every single day. And so I'd like for us to kind of dive a little bit deeper into, that work. And so when someone hears belonging for adopted and looked after students, like what does that mean? Because obviously in education, we do hear about creating an atmosphere of belonging for all students. But you talked about adopted and looked after students. Why is that important?
Yeah, so my own children are adopted. We brought them each home at birth, and learning to I'm a transracial adoptive dad, so bringing home raising children who didn't look like me, and who I knew had experienced relinquishment from their own birth mothers and birth families. I kind of got a very fast exposure and experience into seeing how the world interprets my children and how they perceive my children. As an adoptive parent in most states, um, usually if you go through private or public adoption, and definitely if you're a foster parent, unless it's a real emergency, you have to go through a significant amount of training. I mean, that can be anywhere from like 10 hours to 60 hours. And, biological parents don't have to do that, obviously. Um, and so it took me a while, but as we started advocating for our kids, like our my own personal kid, my two kids are coming into school with these experiences. Um, they've shaped them. It was an initial trauma in their lives. These traumas don't leave children or anyone. And hey, you have fears as a parent. Like um, when my kids, even preschool teachers, start talking about families, when they start talking about, you know, um, even like what is my child going to do if every other child is dismissed and the teacher starts putting their code on? Is that going to make my child or other kids who are adopted or looked after feel like the adult is walking away from them? You get some people are like, they're not even going to worry about that, but research tells us otherwise. A lot of what I learned as a parent and then when I started researching was about these seven core issues in adoptees' lives, and they kind of sound like stages of grief or loss, but there are seven stages that adoptees will cycle through and go through their whole lives. Roja and Maxson wrote a great book on the seven core issues of adoptees, and they show up in classrooms all the time. So sometimes it's about, just stability. Sometimes it's about grief and loss. Sometimes it's about control and mastery. Control and mastery being the place that adoptees sort of get to when they fully incorporated their adoption and loss into their lives. But just like with grief work, you can achieve mastery um, over your life story. And let's say I'm making this up. Let's say you do that as a fifth grader. Hey, I'm sort of out about my adoption. Everybody knows. I talk about my losses. I talk about my birth family. I when I hear um, a story in class, like when the teacher tells me to do a family tree, I'm outspoken about that doesn't work for me. But then kids go through a transition. They go on to middle school and they've got to start all over because everything is new again. Or they go off to college and they sort of have to reincorporate their adoption into their lives. So, to answer your question, my research was about teacher practice. So, what teachers need to know about the adoptee experience. And I made it the big umbrella using the term looked after for any child who's been relinquished, even momentarily, from their birth family. So, had to go live with someone temporarily, came back, or was relinquished later in life. Um, and um, um, what teachers should know, and what are the practices, what are powerful practices that schools teachers can do to support adoptees, with the ultimate goal being it's incorporated into our lives. So when a child's walking through a hallway, when a child's in a classroom, when a child's doing an assignment, like those examples I said before, it's not about everyone walking around on eggshells, but it's about giving that child the voice and having a responsive culture where if a child says, this assignment doesn't work for me, I'm scared about pickup today because the parents raising me are away for vacation and my auntie's picking me up and I never stayed at their house and that's making me think about my birth mother. We don't start saying things like, it's not a big deal, which is what we do, right? And I've been guilty of it too. Like, it's not a big deal, or okay, that's your issue, but the other 399 kids in this building have issues too. Like, I think there are ways that we are expedient sometimes as educators, and it gets in the way of our ability to really support kids. And so my research was an attempt to lift that up because every single classroom has an adopted kid or a looked after kid, if not more. And what I talk a lot about is there is not a major headline right now, and probably for our recent memories, that doesn't connect to adoption or kids who are being looked after. So I like to go through the headlines. So if we take what's going on in the Middle East, Israel and Palestine, we have kids being separated from parents, kids losing parents, kids being raised by other people's parents right now. If we take women's rights issues throughout this country and everything that's going on, these are issues of family, biological family to not have a biological family, whatever it is. If we take anything, you could take the opioid crisis, you could take the migrant crisis right now. For a while, we have issues of relinquishment, children facing real trauma, possibly without the support of their biological parents, and that's in addition to um, many hundreds of children who are in foster care situations right now. So these touch everybody. An interesting thing that came up in my research was adopted adults in schools. So a lot of teachers who are also feel really that don't have a strong sense and can't necessarily find their voice in the professional world. So that was an unexpected finding.
I'd be interested to hear like the two experiences kind of depicted with each other. So you have research that you've done, but then you have real life experience as well. What differs from what you read about versus what you've lived?
Um, I think what I've lived as a parent, I think it's really hard, right? Because I'm Papa Bear, so the feelings of being a parent, and it's every parent's worry, right? Like I'm gonna, there, um, it's when they walk the first time, it's when they ride a bike the first time. I'm getting ready to send my kid off to college next in the fall. It's that um, here you go out into the world, and will everyone understand you, and will everyone take care of you? So it's a different sort of intensity. I bring that intensity to my work too, but um, when you know that little human being intimately, I don't want to say better than they know themselves, but just because developmentally they don't have that self awareness until they're in fifth or sixth grade. But like, um, especially I think being a transracial adoptive parent, so white parents, black kids, I think it's like, here come my children walking into your building. You are going, just as a human being, you're going to see one version of them. And then they have these other things in them. And every parent has that, right? Like you don't know that my sporty kid is very sensitive to, or you don't know that my um, girl in a dress is actually an avid, she loves wrestling or whatever it is. But when it's multiple and it's adoption, and I think when you come at it from, this has come up a lot, like for my kids and for other kids, like the common thing to say, and I think we hear this a lot from other white people, will be like, "Oh, you're doing such a nice thing," or "You're giving them such a gift," or something. It's like, well, first of all, they're the gift to me, and I don't know, especially if I racialize it, but also just who am I? I'm not God, but maybe they would have really loved their life with their biological. Maybe that life would have been just very rich, and who am I to say? And part of my job as a parent is to let them have that feeling, to let them share that with me. Like I kind of wonder what it would have been like to live in Louisiana. I miss my family. I want to know those people. I don't really share my kids' own stories without their permission, but one thing I'll share is like pretty early on, both of them expressed that. I mean, one of them before she turned two, before well, I just named which child. I have a boy and a girl, but like as soon as she could talk, it was like, "Where's my mom and where was I born?" And I want and we took that as like, I want to go, I want to see it, I want to know. Um, and they're on that journey. So leaning into that a lot, at school or professionally when I'm in that, obviously there are other boundaries that exist and I have to respect those, but it I'd say it plays out more and it plays out universally around just that truth. Like I'll see it in some of the principals I work with right now around the migrant crisis in Chicago. Um, a kid comes into the school and right away adults think they know the narrative, even if they haven't talked to the kid yet. So, oh, this family, this. It's like, wait a minute, there's so many possibilities here, there's so many paths, um, and there is so much genius in that person. So if you, the first thing you tell me is here's a 10-year-old fifth grader who's never been in school, right away you're telling me more about yourself than about you, because I know you haven't done the research to see all that knowledge that that child has, that I doubt you have. I mean, I'll say that I definitely don't have. Like, to be more specific, traveling across the world for a few days, I mean, sorry, for a few years, and seeing everything that you saw, taking the risks that you saw, um, those are stories, right? Like that kid's gonna change the world because they've seen things that my sheltered self has never seen. So like it's I think it goes back to that, like, truth, honoring childhood, honoring that kids are full sentient human, like, creatures who experience everything from a variety of perspectives.
That's good. I think one of the challenges is that what's celebrated in education, and so we celebrate IQ, right? But what about EQ? What about AQ? You know what I'm saying? So what about their adversity quotient? What about their emotional quotient, their emotional intelligence? So there's so many different things that that kind of assess brilliance, but yet we focus on one and highlight that one where there are many things, as you mentioned, that people that have overcome an amazing amount of adversity that should be celebrated because what is that? That's growth. That's mastery of a particular thing. And what is education? Is providing information so that individuals can master whatever that concept, whatever that content is. And this individual has done that, but it's not IQ, And so I think that there are so many different things that we can, talk about, as it relates to that. But one of the things you just mentioned was talking about, you mentioned you coach principals, and which also means that you probably had some experience as a principal, and so you were one. And I would like to specifically focus in on the story that happened in 2018. You're a principal, and there's a letter that you wrote to parents, and I want to give you the space to share the story. But tell me a little bit about the letter that you wrote and um, what was like the aftermath of you writing that letter. What was the circumstances even that led up to it as well?
Yeah, so at first I love what you just said about, like, the adversity. Like, not only do we not value that and it gets siphoned to IQ, but also people have hijacked it, right? So then we build so-called grit or resilience into curriculum, but then we're not valuing the kids who actually have to deal with it as part of the system. So I love that. I mean, I love the way you talked about it. I don't like the reality. Um, so um, I had a school leadership job in Chicago, and I lived in this town where I'm sitting right now, where I still live. And it's a suburban, urban, small city that has really similar demographics to about, I don't know, 8 to 10 others in the country, but they're all pretty well known. Um, um, just to name it, it's Evanston, Illinois, and it's a college town. And folks live here because it's known to be a welcoming place, and the term progressive is thrown out a lot. When I heard about the school that had an opening, I talked to the superintendent, talked to some other people, and they described the makeup of the school, and it was about 75% of the students who I worked with in private students and families who I worked with in the private school. So high um, high income families, possibly high net worth families. I didn't really know necessarily. Majority white, and then about 25% Black families, most of whom were on the free and reduced lunch, and the majority of those were free lunch. So we were like, of our free and reduced, about, if there were 100, about 95 were free lunch. So you had big disparity as far as demographics. This is because Evanston, to this day, still has a busing program that was put in place supposedly with the intention to desegregate the schools. Very quickly after it was started, white families found ways to get off those buses and be able to still walk to their neighborhood schools. There were a couple of schools that were built in the historically black part of this town. Um, but little by little, those schools would open and close, open and close, open and close, ultimately being closed. So at the building, I eventually became the principal of the school I was talking about, and I had students who could look outside or stand on their corner, and if there were four kids standing on a corner, none of them went to the same school. So they all went to different schools, and all of them had to cross pretty dangerous intersections if they wanted to walk, which none of the white kids with middle class even didn't have to, even face as a barrier or obstacle to get to school. So when I talked to the superintendent and then when I interviewed for the job, it was like, oh, you worked in the South Bronx and you worked in Harlem and you did some sort of turnaround school. I don't mean turnaround as a sort of copyright, like as a process. I just mean like change work in schools. And oh, you've worked at private schools, and you've been a school leader, and this brings your pieces together. And you're a white guy with black kids, and it's like, oh, this will be nice. And I felt like that too. I was like, I have love all around for this walking into it. And I live in this town, so I'm very invested. When I arrived at the school, when I got the job, my first day on the job, I came and it had not been explained to me that the school had a rubber room, a padded room for students to be put into. And I did not fully understand sort of the setup of the school in that it had, if there were 400 kids, 385 were in the general education and 15 were in what they called at the time a cross categorical special education program. And the students who were in there had had emotional disturbance or behavioral disturbance written into their IEPs. 100% of those students were black and brown students, and they were kind of shoved into a room. Um, De facto segregation on top of de facto segregation. I did know that there was this specialized program. I didn't totally understand how it came to be. Um, my first day on the job, I remember the custodian taking me up to the padded room and being like, "Did you know this was here?" I was like, "I had no idea. I can't believe it. You look outside, you see mansions, you see white families. This is like, do they know it?" And he said, "Yeah, it's here forever. Of course they know it." And I looked at him, I say, "Mr. G, he was my best friend on the job because, that's, he knew the building inside and out. He was like the real school principal." I said, "We need to get, this is not happening." I said, "I can bet I know who's put in that room." And he said, "Yep." He showed me it had prison lighting. So the lighting up on the ceiling that couldn't be kicked down, prison window, and like I said, rubber like mats all around the wall. I said, "How does this?" I mean, like I said, I've taught in the South Bronx 20 at that time 20 years, never seen anything like it. I've visited therapeutic schools, I'd never seen anything like it, and especially in like this bastion of progressiveness, Northwestern University, right out the window. You could see it. Well, you could metaphorically see it. Um, So I said, "We're shutting it down." We made it a supply closet. Right away, I called the district and I said, "I can't believe no one told me. Like, you're trying to tell me the story of the school. There were many stories. White parents had gone to the board on black students. White teachers had bullied a black administrator before me. So I kind of knew the stories, but I was like, here's this monument to, um, I don't think I'm overstating when I say controlling and destroying black body, right? Like I know the students you put in here, possibly if your diagnoses are correct, disabled black kids. Like you are putting them in here. And I said, "How did this work?" He'd say, "Well, a teacher stands outside with their arms folded, and the kid throws a fit in there, as I would too. Like they're locked in this room." So that was sort of like, there's my foundation of getting the job. And again, I'm having all sorts of disillusionment of like, this is the town where I live. No one said anything. No one cares. How many other schools have this? Oh, six other schools have it. Yeah, we have it. Yeah, this is what you do. This is what you do. I'm like, no way. Like, can't be legal and can't be right. I still to this day don't mind talking publicly about it because I still think like if we talk about reparations, we don't need to go all the. I mean, we do go back to 1619, but we can also talk about in the past 20 years, 25 years, like what have you taken away from children that we need to pay back? Um, so that was the summer, got school off the ground, tried to disrupt some things that were also in place. The other most egregious one would be because most of my black students were taking the bus. I found out that they were sort of stamped like as like we make a big deal when we read about the Holocaust of the Jewish star being on Jews like me on their arms to mark them as Jews. Well, all my students who were on the bus who were black had the mark. I think it was a tag. They were the bust kids, which is not just a tag and a reminder, but it's the reminder of you don't belong here. This neighborhood is not for you. Um, so two big things happened. One was, oh, so we undid that. What I did was everyone had a tag, and it said the door you would exit. So it didn't matter if you were. It just had your name, bought everyone. Um, but the two, uh, I lost one of them. But the two big things that happened. Actually, one came later. Um, Several critical incidences happened between when school started late August to around the beginning of October. And it would be critical incidents where white kids would single out black kids and say, you don't belong here, use the N word. I think there was a phrase about like monkey being thrown around, things that from working wherever, I've heard in many places, but the narrative of this town as being woke and progressive and inclusive and anti racist really bumped up against what I was seeing. I was like, this is very racist. My um, I didn't always get things right with the black teachers in the building. And my reflection upon reflection and like lots of thinking about it, I could have done a way better job um, letting them set the pace and the tone. But as a leader and someone responsible for what happened to kids, I went to my boss of the district. I was like, something has to give. Like I have to call a town hall. I have to remind people about just like rules. I have to have parents talk to kids. It's racist and it's just bullying. It's just like 101 how not to be in school. Um, and so I drafted this letter like early, like mid-September. I was like, I need to put it out there. Here's the type of leader I am. This is why I was brought here. I'm not going to deal with it. It's not going to happen here. The district refused to put it out for a while, but stuff kept happening. They didn't want me to put anything out. They were like, and I learned after it went out why. I didn't know that this town would get national attention or would get local. I shouldn't even say national. Would first get local attention um, because about a few hours after I sent the letter to every parent, and the letter named specific quotes that children had said to one another, racist things that had been said, and my vision for the school. And I'd already put out a lot about like, here's who I am, and this is what I want the school to be, and we got to update. Um, but within a couple of hours, I know we were in a staff meeting, and there was a news helicopter above head, and the district was getting calls from the media because it was that story of, you know, even if these things happen everywhere, which not everyone wants to admit, um, it's not supposed to happen in this town. Um, Throughout my principalship, what I kept bringing back to people was we've known there was racism here. In 2016, there was an article that the New York Times put out describing how in this town and three other comparable towns, I think it was like Berkeley, outside of Cleveland, um, Shaker Heights, and some other comparable ones. Um, a black and a white kid are sitting next to each other in the same classroom and are 2 or 3 grade levels apart. In my building, when we looked at the data, um, you could take a fifth grader, a black student with an IEP, and a first grader, a black student without an IEP, even a first or second grader with an IEP would be outperforming that fifth grader, gen ed black student, outperforming on multiple measures. Um, so it became this conversation over and over of like, we had really egregious racist things happen. And then we have this baseline of inequity that we just don't like to talk about and we don't like to take action on. I had teachers who would come to me and say, "Why are you making a big deal of this? We're not a black school. You don't need to make a big deal of it." So to your earlier question, as a parent, the parent in me is like, we live in America. It's a black country. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for black people. One black student in the building makes us a black school, and every single classroom has black people, has black students in it. So, and what I didn't share about the school was, because of the desegregation, the school I was leading was actually a very historically black school. Like, black families could come in and find their family members on the wall, of alumni. Like, oh, my uncle went there. But the white families, because people like me will move to a city for the education and then move out to go get, move back to a city or something. So the white transient was higher. So you did have some people who might have stayed in the neighborhood but didn't have kids in the system anymore, and they were very worried that I was kind of messing with their building. Um, but the black families were like, "This has been going on for decades. Like this has been going on for a long time. Yeah, like let's let's talk about it." And to be fair, like, the previous leaders before me were black, and I can't speak for them, but the amount of pushback I got as a white dude was so significant that I could only imagine. I mean, I know some of the things that especially the white people did, the white teachers and parents did, that was really insidious and really, really hateful and violent and aggressive, did to the one black leader that I know, and I can only imagine what they did to others. When I came in the building, I had to stop white parents from just walking in the building and giving themselves tours. I had a lot of white parents who were redoing the grounds, bringing in their private gardeners to try to redo the grounds, um, while other families just kind of sat and watched. I had to interrupt white parents in the neighborhood who would um, um, call me to say black kids were misbehaving on the playground. There were so many of these I stopped calling them microaggressions, but these moments that were very aggressive, that even if the kids didn't hear them, it does. That spirit filters down it through the organization. Um, what I also learned about status quo, sorry, I know I'm this is a long answer to your question. The other thing I learned about status quo was when white folks like me, I always I don't I can't negate the way I walk through the world, feel this discomfort. We do this is what has become talked about, the Karen thing. Like, we're going to do everything we can to maintain our comfort. So what was happening there was a lot of the white folks were on speed dial, texting rapidly with parents outside who they thought either had power or could affirm their sense of their righteousness. So sometimes what would happen is I might send some email like, "Hey, um, when you dismiss all of your students, I'm noticing and I'm wondering about why certain students aren't walking with you during dismissal. How are you forgetting certain students?" Um, an email like that, if I was implying that there might be any teacher not looking after black students or students who are on the bus, an email like that would be sent to a parent. It would be like, "See, look what I'm being accused of," which would then make its way to a board member, which would then make its way to someone in the district who would come back and say, "Max, fix this," rather than like, "The system's messed up. Like, you can do whatever you need to do to me." Like, which again is some of my privilege, right? Like, do whatever you need to do to me. These problems are still going to be here. Um, and that's something that's harder to face. Um, Lawyers for the district were involved in some of our equity work and did everything they could to make sure that the district wouldn't have to pay out money in different situations. And it was evidence of the system really protecting itself. Um, in my work with leaders, a lot of the talk is about you do have to protect, if you want to do the type of work you want to do, you do have to protect yourself and be political. But it's that the time is always right to do what's right sort of speech of like, if you see it, you're not going to be able to sleep until you say something about it. So like it is coaching both. um,
I have a question for you though, because like you, and this is what one of the things that I took away from our initial conversation, advocacy. Like you, during this conversation that we've been having, you've spoken about not only the adopting of two black children. You talk about some of the inequalities, even whether it's like call-ins for all the the black kids on the playgrounds and things like that. So you mentioned these things, and I'll say this. When I initially heard it, what came into my mind is advocacy, and why was this important for you? Because there can be many people that can see these things like, oh, like you said, they'll be okay. That's not my problem. Why have you made it um, a priority for you to care?
yeah, I mean, the quick answer is I can't not care. Like whatever's happening or whatever I've seen, it just doesn't feel right to do the work, um, and not care. It's well, and I'll tell you another story. My my mother was raised in a very segregated part of Chicago. There are famous Willis wagons that were brought into Chicago by Mayor Willis in Chicago when when families were trying to desegregate schools, and Willis wagons were brought into Chicago for black students while the white students stayed in the main building. The Willis wagons were modulars. And I tell the story regularly about my own grandmother, my white grandmother, white Jewish grandmother. So Jewish, she was not part of her majority Christian or Catholic community, but her whiteness, she found great affinity with other white people. And so when my mom's school building, a Chicago public school, was going to be integrated, my grandmother stood at the front of the building and stopped to try to stop black children from entering. So I tell that story, like I try to tell it a lot. And I had a colleague, a white colleague, say to me, like, it feels like you're trying to work through something. Why do you keep telling that? Like what are you trying to work out? And and maybe I am, but I tell the story to say, like, it's not that long ago, first of all. Second of all, we're not that far away. So I'm not naive to think my mindset, I hope, is different. But what I embody, what I walk around with, because of the way this country was built, because of the systems that protect people like me, I could never ever do something like what she did. But we're always upholding that same system that wasn't that long ago. And so it takes me like, and I'm very upset that she did. I'm incredibly upset that she did that and cannot believe that she loved her great grandchildren as much as she did. So like I can hold all those truths. The quick version of that, if I hear myself telling that, it's like, okay, I'm trying to make up for what she did. And that might be true. But it's also, I think, just this whole message of like truth, like reality. If you still are alive right now and you don't believe that every single system in our country is built up to make life harder for black people, indigenous people first, and then we can go on and on. Brown people, trans people, queer people who stand like the whole lineage. If you still don't believe that, you are not living in reality. So like I think that's part of it. If it's not authentic and truthful, what's the point? And from a school's perspective, there is unfortunately there is no major curriculum I can pick up right now that gets at that truth. And so I feel like it's like there are so many things right now that don't allow children who look like my children to be centered, to be fully human. And I'm not going to give up on that fight, even when my own kids are like, shut up, you're embarrassing us, it's cringe, whatever. It's like, like that analogy of being trauma or making up for like the toxic behavior of you need 10 hugs to make up for one wrong transaction, like something that went wrong. That's my view of how we all need to get along in this world. Like if you if you're working in a system that is predominantly white or dominated by white supremacy, which most institutions are, it's not just one for one, right? It's not just one white kid won an award, so now I'm going to have one black kid win an award. And I'm not saying give awards to everybody. Sometimes I do believe you do, but I'm saying like we need to be really, really intentional and go through the work of like what matters, why does it matter, and is the stuff that really matters going to land on the same people every single time who look like our friggin' founding fathers? Or is it going to look like the people that actually built all of the stuff we take advantage of? I just think we need like honest conversations about that. So my quick answer is like I just can't you can't look away. I think once you get that information, I don't I can joke about the word woke, but I do feel like when you say like it's about being awakened, I do take that seriously. Like read a lot, be awakened. I can never hear too much um, about Black people in America because I was starved of it my whole upbringing.
When you were saying that, you made me, and you probably have seen like the face that I made when you were talking about you can't pick up a curriculum with that in there, and y- y- I almost I laughed while you mentioned that, and it's like the way things are going, you won't be able to, because it's like yeah, because there is a desire, for that information to be removed. And so I was talking to someone last night, and he works in the same space that you work in, and he was like, "No, it's incredibly more difficult because of the legislation that has been going around with like DEI, EDI work, so things like that, and then you have conversations like the one we're having right now, and your work on belonging." And so I wanted to give this because time, I want to kind of land this plane, but I do want to give you the space to be able to share this for an administrator, an educator. Heck, I don't care if you're in education at all. If you listen to this or get an opportunity to hear what Dr. Weinberg is talking about, what is one thing that you can share with us that we can utilize as we move forward, whether it's be creating belonging, or whether it's even going down a journey that you've gone down of being, whether it's fostering or adopted. Like, what is it something that you can share with us for how we can cultivate a sense of belonging for literally all students or all people?
I will share I love the question. I appreciate it. I will share sort of like the framework that grew out of my research, which I do think applies to a lot of different arenas. I don't know the corporate world so well, but I think I do understand relationships and um, you without relationships, we're all kind of screwed, right? Like screwed out of having a rich life and screwed possibly out of survival. So the four things that grew out that I really my research through adopted adults, reflecting on their experiences and about adoptees and adopted kids, what it landed to was like this is just good teaching or good learning experiences. So the first one being a culture of care, cultivating a culture of care, which when I refer to that, a lot of times you hear the phrase climate and culture about a school building or a workplace. For schools or places that center kids, I do mean it in the service of kids. So I'm not talking about the self care. I'm not talking about Brene Brown work for adults. I think that's all fine and good and important. But I do mean it in terms of how adults in a building develop a partnership so that every child who walks in the building feels seen, heard, understood, and cared about. And it's really intentional work about knowing that whatever they walk in with, their own existence. For my case study, it is adopted kids, but you can apply this to anything. It's are there other people like me who have walked in these halls? And if not, are there representations of people like me? Are there posters, are there books, are there movies, are there whatever? And if I want to tell my story, are people going to listen, or are they going to give me a pat on the head and walk away? Or in the school where I was principal, are they going to literally walk over me? Which I did see from teachers in the school I was at. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this is came from the people I was working with, but if you look at critical race theory, or you look at Gloria Ladson Billings' work or Goldie Muhammad's work, anyone who's doing the work right now or who's been doing the work, and Goldie Muhammad goes back to Black literacy societies in the 1800s. Um, it's rigorous academics or meaningful academics. And rigorous doesn't mean I'm going to shove as much knowledge in your head and make you regurgitate it. It means that it reflects you, it connects to you, you have a passion for it, you're interested in it, and you relate to it. And as an adult who has authority, who's been given authority, or I've earned my credentials, so I've earned some authority, I value your brilliance enough to challenge you at a place that you can attain to. Um, when I see teachers who are scared of black and brown bodies or black and brown kids, we are so far away from then seeing them as folks who I want to give challenge to and empower to be change makers. Um, I know I keep saying this, but adoptees and foster kids, when I talk about them, that's not their singular identity, right? So it's they're coming in and they're all the other things too, right? They're Latinx, they're Black, they're they might have one foot in one religion, one foot in another. So it's are you going to challenge all of my multiple identities to be part of the curriculum? The third part, there's no order to this, but I organize them from my own memory. The third part is the one-to-one relationships. When I went into the research, I expected a lot of stuff to come out about. My assumption was there would be a lot about peers, like friendship groups and acceptance. What I learned from in my case study was it has to start with with the adult. And so, which brought me back to babies and attachment theory. Like we are biologically built for attachment. We're mammals, um, and when we're children, we seek those adults who we're going to have the attachment to. It's like we're going to imprint, and we might have multiple adults that we're close to, but that connection is really, really important. So, do I have people that I can share my weekend with, that I can share my struggles with, that are not going to judge me? And my work was about adults are responsible for cultivating that, not the children. It's the adults who have to go out of their way or make it part of their practice to accept unconditionally what children give them. The last part was the most, another surprising part and a lot of fun because I really had to learn a lot. And that was the environmental piece. So, adopted kids looked after kids, and a lot of other kids, most kids have to understand that what they're doing in school can also be done outside of the school. So it's not just saying like, I'm getting the skills to be an effective manager one day or go sort of change the world. It's right now. What I'm doing in the classroom is also being done by the beekeeper here, the corporate person there, the firefighter there, right now. And if we took a field trip next week, we could see it and apply it. And it breaks down to identity too. Like I'm walking through the world, so I want to be a football player and I want to be a politician, or let's say a civic leader and an activist, and I'm an adopted kid. We're going to go study Colin Kaepernick. He is that person. And there are 10 other people, coaches, people in the world who are doing this right now, all the time. One of my friends who inspires me a lot, Isaac Eder, runs this group called Identity. He just interviewed a major league football player who's also an adoptee, and he talks about like, yeah, I was able to make it up to football, but like I met all these people around the world who educated. I mean, around my upbringing, who educated me and were reflections of myself, or in different parts. And so it's that, and then it's the other part about environment or getting seeing the connection is about the independence. So I love telling the story about one of the people that was part of my study. She was a principal, and she made sure every kid, so she had a lot of ability to make change in her building, but she made sure every kid who went through her building could swim, could learn to ride a bike. She had a bike riding program and could garden. And I put her on the spot. I was like, okay, these are great. These are amazing. I'd want my kids to go to your school any given day. But what do they have to do with adoption? Like, why adoption or being looked after or belonging? And she was like, what don't they have to do with these things? These are essential skills to survive and thrive. And if you're on this journey towards independence in a community or a culture that doesn't understand you, what, she's in New York City. How do you get around if you can't bike ride? You can walk or you bike ride. If you want to sail, you want to swim, you want to go somewhere, you want to travel, you want to see the world, you swim. Um, you can't get to the grocery store. It's a pandemic. You garden. So self-sufficiency, self-reliance were like huge things to learn about. Of like, wow, being fully ourselves means also being able to rely on ourselves and get community out of that. So those were fun. Yeah.
Well, wow, this has been an amazing conversation, and I appreciate you for everything that you've shared. I wish we had the opportunity to dive deeper because there's so much. So we'll have to find a way for us to be able to do that. But to land the plane, we end our conversations here with this segment called Better Days Ahead. And that's where our guests come on and share any wisdom, insight, mantras for our listeners. And so, what do you have for us today for any encouragement that there are better days ahead?
Yeah. So mindset on resilience is what I'm taking. I'm just going to keep saying your phrase for your own pot for this over and over and over. But there's a phrase that I learned and I didn't know it would stick with me, and it was the mantra of I went to a small liberal arts school, and the saying was truth even unto its innermost parts. And that comes from a Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, and I think of that all the time. It wasn't like one of those things that's like I'm gonna write it down. It just really resonates. It resonated with me, and I think about it all the time when I'm trying to support my kids with something. I'm like, let's get down to what's the truth, and maybe your truth and my truth need to meet somewhere. But truth, even unto its innermost parts, is my the saying that I carry with me everywhere I go. One day I'll get a tattoo of it.
I love it. I love it. So, for all of you out there that are listening today, truth, even into its innermost parts. And so, to thine own self be true. So, make sure that every single day you walk in your truth, you live your truth, and remember that truth sets us free. This is another segment of the Mindset on Resilience podcast. Thank you all for your time. Until next time.